water moving in and out of these systems. And when it comes to urbanization, we also have the relationship of water with impervious surfaces. Now, impervious surfaces are any man-made artificial surface that prevents rainwater from infiltrating into the ground. So these include sidewalks, these include roads, parking lots, the rooftops of homes and businesses. And these surfaces generate a rapid response in that during heavy rain events, they cause water, rather than infiltrating into the groundwater system, to course over into surface water, which can lead to very severe and sometimes very dramatic flooding events. So the response exhibited by urban systems in response to large inputs of water is ubiquitous. And what I have for you here is a typical hydrograph showing the volume of water shown by Q on the y-axis, moving through a system through time, plotted on the x-axis. Did I say all right? Y, X. Okay, now you know. And this work, it's notable to say that this work, the initial work with urban streams, began in Atlanta. So Mike Paul and Judy Meyer is a former graduate and faculty member of the Odom School of Ecology, respectively. And in their work, they categorized urban streams as having a distinct suite of characteristics, one of which being a flashy hydrograph. So flashy in this sense that relative to the unurbanized watershed, the urban watershed has a very drastic response into the amount of water that's inputted into the system, all in a very short span of time. So there are also urban areas that have an added layer of complexity when trying to deal with these large inputs of water, and that mainly comes from outdated and aging infrastructure. So newer cities have completely separated their wastewater infrastructure from their stormwater infrastructure. Older cities still have these systems tied together in what is called combined sewers. And how combined sewers work is that the water that comes from rain runoff, as well as the water and waste from domestic, industrial, and business facilities, all goes into the same pipe, the same infrastructure. So during base flow events, everything is all well and good. There's enough space in the system for the water to move from point A to point B to the sewage treatment plant. However, during heavy rain events, these systems have a tendency to become overloaded, in that there's not enough space in the system, in that infrastructure, to transfer and regulate all that water. And as a result, water treatment facilities have to discharge water, which at this point is raw, untreated sewage, directly into waterways. So this is what a combined sewer overflow looks like on the ground. And like I said, in extreme cases, this water gets inputted into waterways, but there's also instances where it can come right through stormwater drains going into waterways and sometimes city streets. So shifting gears a bit, in addition to Atlanta being kind of the birthplace for urban stream ecology, it's an interesting place to study watersheds. Biologically, as Atlanta, Georgia transitioned from mainly a forested landscape to an urban landscape, it did so without an agricultural intermediate phase. So this means that in terms of its biotic community, there's a lot of biodiversity in its stream ecosystems that share a lot of familiar characteristics with forested landscapes. From a infrastructure perspective, Atlanta watersheds and the communities in these watersheds still contain large amounts of CSOs. So it's maybe a little difficult to see, but I highlighted all of the CSOs that are still currently found in Atlanta watersheds. And from a social aspect, Atlanta is a very interesting place to study when you consider the degree to which these communities, these residences in these watersheds interact with urban streams. And amongst these watersheds, a particular one of interest is Proctor Creek. Now, Proctor Creek is a tributary of the Chattahoochee River. It is the only watershed in Atlanta that is strictly confined solely within the city limits. And in recent years, it has gained a lot of attention due to the severity of the flooding events that take place as a combination of impervious surface and CSOs. So this picture here was taken from a neighborhood in the Proctor Creek community, Buckhead. And as you see, this untreated sewage has reached well beyond the confines of the waterway. And it's so severe that I included a snippet from a news article addressing this situation where an activist, Tony Torrance, describes that people had to swim out of their houses. They had to jump out of windows and stand on top of tables in order to avoid contact with this water. So this creates a lot of economic impacts for these communities in that there's often property loss, property damage, and due to the reoccurring flooding events that take place, these homes are saturated and contain high amounts of moisture, which lead to the development of mold and mildew in these residents' houses. And that in itself can lead to a variety of health effects from asthma, ammonia. And as you see from this sign here, the city is aware that this water is dangerous, yet it is literally flooding through the homes of these residences in the Proctor Creek community. So acknowledging the fact that a lot of these environmental issues that are being faced are deeply rooted in larger issues associated with political and economic inequality, as well as that these communities, which are predominantly African American, are the most affected by these environmental forces, yet least represented at the table when it comes to environmental decision making. Community-led, community-driven watershed groups began to develop in the area. Two of the most notable being the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance and Ecological Community Action. So these two groups came together to form the Proctor Creek Stewardship Council, and with additional resources and funding from other groups began to discuss ideas on how to implement skill and capacity building amongst the residents facing these issues so that they could become more engaged and more educated and more informed. So what these watershed organizations wanted to do was to take the residents of the two most impacted watersheds, one being Proctor Creek, another being Entrenchment Creek, located on the south side of downtown Atlanta. Now, Proctor Creek is downstream of Mercedes-Benz Stadium, while Entrenchment Creek is downstream of Turner Field. So for those of you familiar with those areas, with those facilities, you can imagine the amount of impervious surfaces they contain, and that is all the water that is going into the watershed that is impacting these communities with these combined sewer overflows. So they also acknowledge the fact that seeing the talks and discussions between the community groups and the power it had through the sharing and exchange and transfer of ideas and knowledge, they decided to start what was called the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network. And what the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network is, it's a training program for residents of Proctor and Entrenchment Creek in which they learn about the causes of stormwater flooding, the economic, social, and health impact stormwater flooding has on their communities, and they become empowered in ways that they can better advocate for sustainable solutions to these issues. So as the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network was gaining notoriety and attention, my advisor, Dr. Krista Capps, as well as Drs. Jennifer Rice and Kyle McKay, received a small seeds grant to engage with the community stakeholders in this region to ask questions related to urban watersheds. And the men and women of the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network, acknowledging the fact that this occurrence is ubiquitous, it happens everywhere outside of Atlanta, wanted to find a way to transform what they created into a platform that could be disseminated along a larger group of people. So they decided to do this through the power of service learning, specifically students who are currently enrolled in Ecology 3370, to which my advisor, Krista Capps, instructs and I TA voluntarily, are engaging in a service learning course where they're taking the curriculum developed by the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network and converting it into online resources, online curriculum that can be accessed and easily disseminated to groups of people, whether they want to start their own watershed organizations or whether they just want to learn about the issues that they are currently facing. So I say all this to come back to my point. My main focus, the main focus of my dissertation relates to urbanization. And as a PhD student in ecology, I'm most likely going to be studying how freshwater macroinvertebrates respond to urbanization over the course of time. As a student in ICON, one thing that I really want to do as a conservation practitioner is be able to effectively engage and communicate with communities that are facing these sort of problems. So I shared this with you just to show you the steps that I'm taking in order to build those relationships and that trust, so that I can be better suited to not only ask questions, but to ask the questions that need to be asked, that I consider their perspectives, their truth, their reality into the incorporation of my design. And that is all.